Hi, I'm Azar Majedi. After a break, a couple of months of break, Iran came to the top of the news, international news, since yesterday. Yesterday, November 4th, was the 30th anniversary of hostage-taking in the American embassy in Iran. 30 years ago, on this day, some of the Islamist students, a faction of the Islamic regime, occupied the American embassy. This tactic was taken because Islamic regime was becoming increasingly threatened by protests, demonstrations, by the opposition, by women's movements, by the left, communists, the workers, the unemployed. In Kurdistan, there were different movements asking for their rights, demanding their rights, asking for more freedom, opposing the censorship, opposing the imposition of the restrictive Islamic and religious rulings on the society, the social side, the cultural side. So there was a very, very vibrant society fighting for their rights, demanding their rights. Occupation of the American embassy and hostage-taking was an effort to disarm the populist left in the society, which had a sort of upper hand in the whole movement. Anti-Americanism, anti-imperialism were very sort of important slogan of the time of the 1979 revolution against the monarchy and until then. Another reason was to create an important and impressive foreign enemy in order to mobilize the people behind the regime and silence the ones they could not mobilize. This tactic gave the regime a breathing space of a few months for it to organize and to prepare a brutal clampdown on the society. In that sense, this tactic was a successful tactic and was an important one. It only took a few months before the regime had to really resort to force, to declare a state of siege, to take thousands and thousands and thousands of people, young people especially, even kids of 14 years old, 13 years old, put them in jail, imprison them, torture them in its notorious prisons, summary executions. In the decade followed, more than 100,000 people were executed in notorious prisons of the Islamic regime. And that was the time that Mr. Mousavi was the prime minister. And very high, even when he wasn't the prime minister, he was very close to Khomeini and had important state roles. And so many of other state reformist figures who are now both inside Iran and outside have taken this sort of so-called reformist position. They were all at that time important part and parcels of this regime in reinforcing it, solidifying its jails, its security forces, very, very important roles. This action, the hostage-taking, became a very, very important ingredient, ideological ingredient of the Islamic regime and political Islam, the Islamist movement. A movement which actually was brought from the margin of the society into the mainstream in the region, in the Middle East, in North Africa, after the Iranian Revolution and coming to power of an Islamic regime, and especially after this, anti-Americanism, which later on led to Islamist movement becoming one terrorist pole against the other one, the state terrorism led by the US. This day was a dark day in the life of the Iranian people. To see their society being really imprisoned by a reactionary state, by a religious government, a misogynist one, a brutal one, a murderous one, and seeing hundreds, thousands of the people being killed, executed, tortured, raped, being thrown into sheer poverty, prostitution by this regime. Yesterday, people in Iran took matters in their own hands. The day that the regime was going to celebrate its 30th glorious day of anti-Americanism, something that it does every year, many people, thousands and thousands of people around the country, especially in Tehran, the capital, and other cities, and demonstrated against the regime. There were demonstrations everywhere, many parts of Tehran, thousands of especially young people from all sections of the society, but many young people, young women especially, in front of the demonstrations. Clashes with the security forces were dominant everywhere. Tear gas everywhere. There were shootings. There were people who were injured. Hundreds were arrested and taken to jail. No one still knows what happened to them. There was a very, very great atmosphere of solidarity among the people. The slogans were very much radicalized in comparison to a few months ago when the protest movement began. Many state reformists, figures and leaders have begun protesting and stating over and over, repeatedly, that they are only for reforming the Islamic regime, not for overthrowing it. Why? Because they see people are not stopping at reform. People are going to overthrow the regime. This is what the people want. This is the will of the people. People, all these reformist figures, abroad and inside Iran, talking about secularism is not something that people are ready for. People of Iran are not ready for secularism. People of Iran are fighting and dying for bringing this religious dictatorship down and replace it with a secular state. A secular state that respects women's rights, women's equality, women's freedom, unconditional freedom of expression, of association, of protest, of strike. People want to bring this regime down and create a society where equality, freedom, and prosperity and welfare of the people are respected. This is what the people want. Yesterday, people in Iran, in their thousands, bravely shook one of the most important foundations, ideological and political foundations of the Islamic regime and political Islam, the Islamist movement. Everywhere, all freedom-loving people should support the struggle of the Iranian people for freedom, equality, prosperity, and for overthrow of the Islamic regime.